I think that bridge building is a 21st century skill. I think it's going to be as important as AI competency or coding because I think that the United States is the most diverse democracy in the history of democracies, and we're not going to be able to build an experiment of such diversity if people like you and I can't see each other and listen to each other. Welcome back, amazing people, to another episode of The Hopeful Majority, episode 89. Yes, we're one short of 90. And today, we're not going to do an interview. We're going to do a conversation and dialogue between you and I about a question that I keep getting, which is, Manu, how can we have conversations with people that are different than ourselves, with my neighbors, other people around me, when national politics is so freaking crazy and polarized? How many of us feel that way? Let's say you're somebody that despises the Trump administration. You look at all the things that are happening right now in our national politics, and you say, look at all this craziness. There is no way we can bridge divides at this time. There's no way the hopeful majority is active. Or if you're somebody that, let's say, despises progressive politics and you're consider yourself on the right, and you say, look at all the crazy reaction to the President Trump's great actions and administrations. How can I possibly have a conversation with those people? Well, that's the question we're going to address. It's a behemoth of a question. And yet, I believe we can get there. I believe we can get there because, in fact, I've started to feel a little bit more hopeful, believe it or not, about the need and the possibility for people of very different backgrounds and conversations to be able to listen to each other, to be able to engage, to be able to have dialogues at an incredibly divided time. Here's why I think so. And this time, I'm actually not going to just use anecdotes. I'm actually going to back this up with hardcore data. There's a fascinating organization out there called More in Common. They do research studies on an annual basis, sometimes on a more frequent basis. And they recently came out with a study that identified, the study's called the Connection Opportunity. We'll put it up right now, that identified three key statistics. First, 70% of Americans feel a sense of responsibility to connect with people of different backgrounds and viewpoints. Second, 74% of Americans are interested in engaging in bridging activities in which they could work to achieve shared goals that improve their communities. And number three, 66% of Americans believe they can learn a lot from interacting with people who are different from them. What? 70% feel a sense of responsibility to connect, 74% want to work with somebody that is different than them, and 66% want to interact with people where they can learn from them and from their different viewpoints. And yet, the question, how can we have conversations with people that are different than ourselves when our national politics is so polarized? Well, let's hone in on that question. I call this the perception gap. I think that we're living in a time that is supposedly the most divided, and yet the average daily American, people like you and I, are interested in open to having conversations. How do we explain the discrepancy of the perception that is in the media, perception that is in the real world, perception that our politicians create about our incredible chasms with the reality of the fact that most people in our country are listening and open to connection? How do we reconcile that? Well, if you've been a listener of the Hopeful Majority, there's a common theme that we've resurrected throughout the show, and it's called the Outrage Industrial Complex, the OIC, as this notion that we've built a society where outrage sells and nuance does not. It is not interesting to show the stuff that is working. It is not interesting to show the examples of Americans learning from each other. It's not interesting to be able to demonstrate two people coming together to actually work together to solve a problem. What it is interesting is to show the crazy shit show that is out there in the reality of the world, to show the discord, the anger, the takedown clips, the outrageous takes that are taking each other apart, the YouTube banners that demonstrate that you got to click on this video because it's insane. Outrage sells and nuance doesn't. Why is that important? It is important because outrage has distorted our perception and created this reality that the problem in our country, in my view, is not that we're incredibly divided. We've always been divided. There's been extraordinary divisions in our country, especially I'm talking between average Americans. The problem today is that we have a loud minority of voices capturing the microphone while the rest of us stay completely silent. That's the problem. The outrageous voices from across the political spectrum, the politicians that want to keep the binary of us versus them because it's easy to win votes, that is set up a structure where when you and I are interacting on a daily basis, we let the reality of our politics, the perception that is out there, cloud our ability to actually be able to listen and have conversations. And that is really problematic. Why is that problematic? Because I believe that the answer to the question we opened with, how do you have conversations at this incredibly divided time, lies in the realization that we can separate what is happening in our national politics with the connections and engagements that we're making at our local level. We as individuals and as Americans can listen to each other, can talk to each other, can work together. We should not let our national politics change that. Because if we let our national politics change that, the civic fabric of our country and our democracy suffers because it rests on this notion that we don't have a democracy if we cannot talk to each other. Another way to think about this is the crazy uncle problem in Thanksgiving. The crazy uncle problem, what is that problem? The crazy uncle problem is that you got one or two individuals in your family that are relatively crazy and they ruin it for everybody. And then you've got everyone else that is completely quiet. You know that weird Thanksgiving dinner? In some ways, I think that reflects the tenor of our national politics. So, how do we actually break this chain? Because I believe that the secret to the question is realizing that the perception of our national politics should not affect the day-to-day interactions. And I think the way we solve that, the way we realize the 70%, the 74%, 66%, that the majority of Americans, sounds like the hopeful majority, right, want to be able to connect and listen. I think the way we change that is by doing three things. Thing number one is we have to, I think, equip everyday Americans with the capacity to be able to have these conversations, have conversations with people that are different than ourselves, be able to engage and listen. As I've stated repeatedly throughout the show, I think that bridge building is a 21st century skill. I think it's going to be as important as AI competency or coding, because I think that the United States is the most diverse democracy in the history of democracies, and we're not going to be able to build an experiment of such diversity if people like you and I can't see each other and listen to each other. So what's an example of those conversations? What's an example of being able to equip someone with those capacities and skill sets? Well, one of the organization I help lead, Bridge USA, we build college chapters across the country. And what we do is every bi-weekly, let's say, our chapters will host a conversation or a dialogue, and students will come in, they'll participate, they'll be trained on moderation skills. There's 4 norms that I want everybody to know about that have been talked about in previous shows. Listen to listen rather than to respond. We start a conversation with these 4 norms every time. Norm number 2 is attack the argument, not the person. Norm number 3 is don't interrupt or have side conversations. That one's a little obvious. Norm number 4 is people represent only themselves and not broader social groups, so you can have conversations. So you start to equip people with the capacity to be able to have these dialogues. But here's step 2, is I think most people have given up on the possibility of a conversation today. I think most people have given up. One of the saddest testimonials I hear when you pull off a really successful bridging conversation is someone at the end of that conversation says, "Man, this was great. I didn't think this was possible. There was no way I thought this was possible." And I hear that over and over again. And I think that's incredibly tragic. The reason why I think it's incredibly tragic is because it means that the outrage industrial complex is winning. It means that at a time when outrage sells and nuance doesn't, it means that we've tainted the perception and possibility for what actually can happen in our society. Average everyday people like you and I think we think that the Republican is Tucker Carlson and an average Democrat is someone like AOC. And so when you see your neighbor, you see friendships, you see engagements, you immediately associate that. And so what we have to do is we have to actually demonstrate and I think show that conversations are possible. One of the episodes that will be upcoming is actually a replay of our conversation we had, where we had our Columbia students, yes, at Columbia University, host a conversation about Israel-Palestine, and they talk about their journey doing that. And what's so powerful about that conversation is at the end of that dialogue, a student raised their hand and they said, "I wish we had more of this at Columbia. This should be the symbol of Columbia, talking and dialogue, not discord and tumult." If we can show people that conversations and dialogue are possible, we can actually flip the reality and help people realize that this is possible. So step 1, equip people with the skills. Step 2 is actually show people that this stuff is possible through compelling narratives, demonstrate impact. And here's step 3. Step 3 is we have to build an identity, a community around this notion of pluralism and bridge building. What's so powerful about our political parties today is that being a Democrat, being a Republican is a part of people's identity. So when you attack someone's Republicanness or someone's Democraticness, I don't even know if those are real words, but you get what I'm saying. When you attack that, it challenges people's fundamental belief in who they are, challenges their humanity, hits them. And that's really challenging because how can you talk to someone when in a dialogue, they fundamentally feel like their existence is on the line? And the way we start to change that is I think we have to build a new identity that rests above the left and the right. It's what I call the hopeful majority of people. I think the real divide in our politics right now and between everyday Americans is not necessarily left right. I know a lot of conservatives, I know a lot of Democrats. You've heard a lot of them on the show that have really strong views, but they're open minded. They want to listen. And that's why I think the real divide in our politics is between open mindedness and closed mindedness. It's between people that want to be able to engage and listen and people that want to shut people out. It's between people that want to build trust and learn and be curious. And it's about people that believe that exposure to new ideas is fundamentally dangerous. And I think when you can start to build an identity around that precept, you can really start to go somewhere. So, three things: equip people with the skills to have bridging conversations. And if you're again wondering how do you do that, there's so many episodes we've had, like episode 82 or 81, where we actually demonstrate the power of some of these conversations. We all bring on some folks to be able to have those dialogues. Step number 2 is you actually show people that these conversations are possible. The Israel-Palestine example at Columbia, I think, is fascinating. And step number 3 is you actually build an identity, a community around being a bridge builder. I'm a bridge builder at heart. I might be a Republican, I might be a Democrat, but first, I'm a citizen. Second, I'm a bridge builder. And third, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. Get what I'm saying? When you can start to layer identity, I think that this becomes really powerful. And that's, I think, the secret to answering the question, how do we have conversations at this really crazy effing time? And again, the answer to that question is if we let the perception of what is happening in international politics preclude the possibility for us to actually be able to listen and engage with our neighbors, we're shooting not only ourselves in the foot, but our democracy in the foot. And the 3 things that I outlined are ways in which we can actually start to elevate and shift and get beyond a politics where, as the More in Common report said, 70% of Americans feel a sense of responsibility to connect, 74% are interested in engaging in bridging activities, and 66% believe they can learn something from someone that is different than themselves. That is really powerful. It would be a shame if one of the most ambitious, I think the most ambitious democratic experiment in the history of humanity didn't succeed at a time when most Americans do actually want to listen and engage. You are part of the hopeful majority, and I appreciate you listening to the show because every week what happens is we'll bring on interesting guests or we'll have conversations like this where we actually demonstrate that this is possible. And we're now in episode 89, which is one away from 90, which is kind of crazy for me to think about. But I just want you to know that I'm so grateful to you for listening. Every Monday, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content, we are building this majority of people to be able to answer questions like this so that when you go back in your daily life, you have the skills and tools needed to be able to combat and shift the reality of what is possible. Dialogue is possible. Conversation is possible. Don't let the outrage industrial complex change your capacity for what you believe in. Final thing I'll say is I'm actually stepping away for the next 3 weeks. And so after this episode, you're going to get 3 replays of some amazing, amazing conversations. And I really hope that you listen to them because they demonstrate, and there's 3 of the conversations I've had over the last year that show again how you can engage with the media, how you can engage with college campuses, and most importantly, how you can build a hopeful majority at a time when everyone tells you it's impossible. Thank you so much, my friends, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.